Hello, everybody. Okay, it's after lunch, so I'm going to try to be as loud, boisterous, and silly as I possibly can be without getting thrown out in the road. First of all, I think we should all thank Linda Hutchison-Jafar for doing this again, and her whole team. I think it's very admirable what they're doing here. And I'm waiting for my PowerPoint presentation. So I'll kill a little time by, yes, my name really is Stephen Greenleaf, and yes, it is okay to laugh about that. In fact, I encourage it, because environmental activism and environmental awareness can get pretty depressing, and any opportunity to laugh and be a little bit jolly is fine by me. So what I'm going to try to do with my presentation today is inform you a little, hopefully scare you to death, and then come out with, at the end, with some positives and some things that we can do. Because I'm supposed to present on, can youth do anything? What can youth do? The answer is not only yes, can you, but you better. Because my generation and the generation before me have really messed things up thoroughly. I apologize for my little part in it. We all could have done a lot better, and we have failed. So here's my contact information. Please feel free to contact me if I can help you with research or anything. I don't know all the answers, but I have a lot of very smart friends. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about Caribbean Institute of Sustainability. We're a nonprofit. Mostly we do training and education. We do some consulting work. And I try to help little NGOs every chance I get to help them build their ability. I do notice there is some territorialism in environmental fields in Trinidad and Tobago, and that does no one any good. So if you're established, one of the best things you can do if you're a young person and who's interested in this stuff, find somebody younger than yourself and mentor them and encourage them and do something. Pay it forward. You know the concept pay it forward? The movie? Anybody see it? Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. Next slide, please. Nice little picture of Las Cuevas. All these photographs are from courtesy of Stephen Broadbridge, one of the founders of Trini Eco Warriors, by the way. So thank you to Stephen. Next slide. So should you get involved? You're involved. So that's kind of not much of a question. You're already involved. We're all involved. Next slide, please. That's in northern China, I think. So here's global warming in action, climate change in action. Next slide. You can't talk about environment without talking about everything else, because environment is a gender issue. It is a woman's issue. Women's biology, we were discussing it over at our table. Pollution gets in the environment. It preferentially attacks women, reproductive tissue, and children. So if you're into gender issues, you better be into environmental issues. They're not separable. Environment is a poverty issue. Poverty and environmental degradation are evil twins. You hardly find one without the other. It's an economic issue. It's a national security. I'm from the United States. I'm originally from Berkeley, California, and obviously a lot of American politics has to do with energy, climate change, and national security, and often to the detriment of whole countries abroad. And it's absolutely a youth issue. I mean, biologically, it's a youth issue. Your future's at stake. The global economy is at stake. You want a job? Ignore the environment at your peril. Anybody in this room want to maybe get a job away from Trinidad for a while? Any young people thinking about that? Anybody? Well, if you don't know something about the environment and what it means in business and in politics and in your daily life, you're probably not going to get that job. Okay, next slide, please. I said I'm going to try to scare you a little. Here comes the scary part. So big environmental issues, population carrying capacity, water, public health. I'll go through these, but just notice consumption. 1 does not equal 6. Would we all agree that 1 does not equal 6? Okay, very fundamental concept. We'll get back to that. Next slide. Disturbing slide, I think. But what is the global effects of population growth in Africa, and what is the Earth's carrying capacity? How many people are too many? Maybe 1? I don't know. I don't want to know the answer to this question. We don't want to ever find out what the Earth's carrying capacity is, right? But now that child is probably long gone. And so what for Trinidad and Tobago? I mean, yeah, it pulls at your heartstrings, But every child left behind in this way, isn't that an economic cost? Isn't that a burden on public health, on food, on education, et cetera, et cetera? So there's very little that's disconnected from you when it's a small planet. It's a very small planet, right? So even that, we all on this, we're global citizens, and we all pay a little bit of the costs of this sort of thing. Next slide, please. Water scarcity. We've had water wars in California where people literally got shot over it in the past. It will happen again, and it's directly linked to climate change, because if sea level rises, the amount of groundwater and surface water that's available to do everything we need water for is going to be more and more infiltrated with saline water from the sea. So less water, less land, right? Next slide, please. And again. Public health. Okay, this is a burning topic in Trinidad and Tobago. I've heard some people talk about, let's do local food production, right? I don't eat anything produced in Trinidad and Tobago if I can avoid it. Nothing. I don't eat out of the Gulf of Paria. It's one of the most polluted waterways on earth. I don't, especially the oysters and the shrimp, don't eat that stuff. North Coast, East Coast, Tobago, maybe. Gulf of Paria, don't eat it, don't buy it. We've heard a lot of people saying, what are specific things you can do? When you go to buy something, vote with your money. I mean, your vote at the polling box might not make much difference, but people like your money, so vote with your dollars. Go to the fisherman or the fish market and say, where's that coming from? Oh, we bought it from a guy in Claxton Bay. Sorry, I ain't eating that. You start stocking fish from Manzanilla or Charlottesville, I'll be back to do business with you. That, over time, that kind of informed consumerism definitely has an impact. Our local farmers, many of them, I'm not saying all of them by any means, they usually make pesticide cocktails, blending 3-4 pesticides together before they spray it. There is no way to do that safely. That's illegal everywhere. Once you blend them, there's no way to know what the biochemistry and the biological effect of that is. And most of our produce here in Trinidad has outrageous amounts of petrochemical and pesticide residue all over it. You shouldn't even eat it. You shouldn't even put it near you. It's that bad, a lot of it. Not all. I'm not saying all. And the water that they're using, for example, the Tacarigua River comes out of Cora, right? Comes out laden with fecal coliform. Human sewage in the water. Goes straight into the Wassa treatment plant, where that has to be treated back out. Goes into Tunapuna, laden with petrochemical residue and runoff from the streets and the business. Goes into the industrial estate, turns into what is almost acid. It's what comes out of there is literally dead water. Then goes south of the highway where farmers pump it out and put it on vegetable crops. Now the vegetables, remember, those bioaccumulate. They concentrate the toxins in the reproductive tissue. What's the reproductive tissue of a plant? The fruit, the stuff you eat. Then hose it down with pesticide residue, pesticide cocktails that are illegal and dangerous, then haul it down to the market and say, here, feed this to your child. No, it's bad, real bad. And we're seeing the results. Now, genetically, Trinidad and Tobago, because of your predominantly either West African or Indian genetic makeup, you should genetically be predisposed to hypertension, sickle cell, and diabetes. But now in Trinidad, and my genetics from Northern Europe should be predisposed to cancer. Not every case, but in general numbers. But Trinidad's cancer rates are skyrocketing. Some of that is from environmental causes. And I don't care what the number is. Somebody will say, well, you can't prove this and you can't prove that. I'm not going to have that conversation. We ain't got time to waste our time talking about whether or not it's bad to put pollution in our bodies. I'm not having that conversation with anybody again. If it's more than one person getting cancer avoidably, that's one too many, right? Now, this is straight from the Minister of Education. 30% of the new kids coming into the school system in Trinidad and Tobago today are special needs kids. That's over 6,000 kids per year. The school system does not have the capacity to deal with 6,000 kids total special needs. And you're getting 6,000 new ones every year. Anybody here? How many people here know a special needs kid or a disabled person who's either got mental or physical disabilities right now? Come on, everybody, participate. Right? That's looking like 20%. So we're in line, right? Autism, ADHD, ADD. In America, we've seen autism rates increase by 125%, I think it is, in my lifetime. 1 in every 110 kids in America has autism now. New studies are beginning to show conclusively a link between the stuff in the environment and a sick kid. So, you having trouble getting people in Trinidad off their backsides and get them interested about environment? Sick kids, if they can't get excited about that, then maybe you should be talking to somebody else. Next slide. Energy and global politics. As an American, this is a big part of our national identity. The cowboys, the police of the world, right? Next slide. In 1961, Dwight Eisenhower, when he was saying goodbye to the country after being president for 8 years, he had been the general of the Army in World War II. So we're not talking some liberal peacemonger freak, right? We're talking a guy who made his career in the military. Warned about we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted interest, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Next slide. And here's the results. This is the highway of death, it was called, where in the first Desert Storm, as the Iraqis tried to get back out of Kuwait, and American aircraft just basically crop dusted for human lives up and down the road for weeks at a time. Hardened soldiers were driving up this road weeping in tears and had to be dragged back into Kuwait to take them to the hospital. Also, most of the slugs there were depleted uranium, so now we have a nice cancer spike in that area of Kuwait and southern Iraq, right? This is about energy. How we use energy is how we how we perpetrate global warming, right? See the connection here? Okay, next slide. And this is very pertinent today. Here's President Ahmadinejad in Iran inspecting centrifuges to enrich uranium. And this could very easily turn into a shooting war any moment right now, including the potential exchange of nuclear weapons. He says it's for peaceful purposes. Other people say not. It's all about the geopolitics of energy, which is also about climate change, right? So these issues aren't isolatable. Next slide. Biodiversity. We were talking about wildlife in Trinidad. We had I brought some guys on a tour. They went to Costa Rica and then they came here. And we toured them around the island and they kept saying, "Where's all the wildlife?" I said, "In the pot. It's all you know." I have a friend puts down $70,000 worth of citrus on an estate he has out in Mayaro, right? He wants to bring back his estate, reforest, have food to give away to food banks and people. He also has a squatter living on his land, but he don't interfere with the squatter. He says it's not worth the fight. One day he gets a phone call, "Your estate burned down." So he goes out there, brand new $70,000 worth of citrus, gone, the whole estate burned to the ground, except around the squatter's house. He goes by the squatter, says, "What do you have? What happened?" The guy goes, "Oh yeah, I burned it down." He says, "Well, why did you burn down my estate?" "Boss, it was iguana in a tree." Seriously. They didn't get the iguana, by the way. The iguana got away. The citrus bought it. But generally speaking, we have global fisheries are collapsing all over the world, right? So this means money out of your pocket, fish that aren't on the table, jobs that are lost, again, costs. Dollars and cents costs. I'm trying to give you tools here that you can use to deal with the apathetic. For the person who says, environment, that don't affect me. Well, yeah, it does. If they don't think it does, it's because they aren't paying attention or they haven't been informed, and that is one place that you all can have a big impact. It's just informing people, questioning people, rattling people, interfering with people, pestering people. I'm a notorious pest. The ministers all, oh God, here he comes. But I don't care. So livelihoods are at risk. And then, of course, we've all heard about all the medicines that might be out there that we're losing because we're knocking down forests. I've been through this. In Northern California, we have this cute little tree. It'd fit in here. It's called a Pacific yew. Always told it was a junk tree, no value. So when you're doing forestry, you cut them down, burn them, gone. Turned out that in the bark of that was a whole family of chemicals called Taxol that turned out to be very useful cancer drugs. So it's not always just in the Brazilian rainforest or some hypothetical thing. This really happens. Next slide, please. Here's a species that's on its way out. Has very little chance of survival. Their habitat's going, and interestingly, when I was a million years ago, when I was an undergraduate, our professors were warning about global warming in 1980, 82. And everybody said, you just radical Berkeley liberal, anti-capitalist, alarmist freaks. You long-haired Berkeley people, you don't know what you're talking about. But one of them joked, he said, well, if they melt all the Arctic ice cap, they'll be able to drill for oil under it. And it was a joke until last week, Shell and Chevron are talking about drilling in the Arctic. And here's an interesting thing business-wise. Lloyd's of London, right? Kind of the granddaddy of all great capitalist companies, came out with a press release saying, basically, don't expect us to insure Arctic oil drilling because it's a bad idea for the environment. There's no way to mitigate the risk, and you should definitely not even consider drilling for oil in the Arctic. Now, this isn't environmentalists saying this. This is Lloyd's of London, the granddaddy of all corporations, right? Next slide, please. There's a howler monkey from Chaguaramas, I think. Next. Consumption. We covered this a little bit, but some estimates say that to maintain our level of consumption of everything, from water to posters to bags to electricity, we need 3 Earths just to keep up. But the developing world wants to consume at the higher rates that most of us in affluent countries are used to having, right? So if the numbers I've gotten is it really would take about 6 Earths. Next slide. Slide, please. So there's 1, right? Next slide. 1 does not equal 6. This shouldn't be a very difficult concept, but apparently some people just don't get it. There is no future here. Go back 1 slide, please. 1, 6. Okay, I'll drub that enough. Next slide, please. Oh, I will tell you one thing interesting. Astronauts, this is an anecdotal story. Astronauts are usually like military guys, engineers, real gung-ho, not considered liberal, forward-thinking, radical-thinking people. They all go up there one way, and they all come back environmentalists. Every one of them comes back an environmentalist because they see this beautiful little blue ball with this fine, thin layer of atmosphere barely protecting it from the vacuum of space. Look out the other side of the space capsule, and there's nothing but a black, hostile void. That'll make an environmentalist out of anybody, and it does. Natural capital. This is an important term. You're all going to have to learn it and learn to speak it. This is putting a value to everything that nature gives us. How much is clean air worth? How much is clean water worth? How much is flood control worth? A forest on the hills above Diego Martin provides us with habitat, recreation, clean water, clean air, flood control, maybe food, who knows what all. In the past, the debate has always been, well, if you protect the environment, you hurt the economy. But that's fake voodoo economics. That's myth. That's a lie. That's always been a lie, because all those things in nature are feeding the economy. One number I heard was it works out to about $12 trillion a year globally is the value of natural capital, about 20% of global GDP. I think that's a gross estimate. I don't know what the accurate number is. The point is, nature is putting a lot of money in our pockets and food in our pots and fuel in our cars. And if you don't value that, it's a lot easier to ignore it, right? So a lot of people have worked on this. Dr. Agard at UE is one of the world leaders in this topic. You got to brilliant person right here in Trinidad and Tobago talking about this. Next slide, please. So here's back home in California, mining for gold in the 1880s. They got a lot of gold out of it. To this day, there's mercury in all our rivers in the Sierra Nevada, and you can't eat the fish 160 years later. What's that cost? If you compare that cost to the value of the gold, all of a sudden the mining industry doesn't look as profitable anymore, right? If you make them internalize and truly pay, and the quarry industry in Trinidad and Tobago is internalizing its profits and externalizing all its problems. That's just the truth. Next slide. Here's a local guy who very much is keenly aware of the value of natural capital. Poor forests, high floods, high runoff, and his wall is in the drain and his land is going away. That land's probably out in the Gulf of Paria by now. Next slide, please. What's the value of that guy? Kyle, how much they sell turtle meat for? 10, 20 TT a pound? Right. So a 700-pound female leatherback might yield maybe 300 pounds of meat, maybe 1,800, maybe 3,000 TT if you're lucky. I guarantee you that leatherback is worth a lot more alive than it ever would be dead. Right? And this great studies on this started in Africa when it was the first one to put in big game reserves in the Serengeti. And all the cattlemen said, wait. My cattle are worth money. You're going to take my cattle off the range to grow lions? What's a lion worth? So somebody studied it. This was back in the 80s or 70s even. Turned out back then that a lion walking across the savannas of Kenya was worth 1.1 million US dollars in terms of ecotourism revenue. A giraffe was worth 300,000, a rhino was worth 600,000. That was then. I don't know what they're worth now. Next slide. There's an ocelot. This is a species here in Trinidad and Tobago that's a very real possibility of being extinct any time now. Very few of them left. What's that worth? I'd pay. I know a lot of people would pay to come here to see it, but only if there are some to see. Next. Climate change. Okay, here's the point. So there's still climate change skeptics out there. They're all funded by either the coal industry or the oil industry, every one of them. 99% of the world's living Nobel laureates agree there is climate change and global warming, and it is a reality. So we got to stop having that discussion, right? The bad news is that Kyoto Protocol said, well, we'll hope to keep global climate change under 2 degrees by 2025. Looks like we may have already hit that number now. So we're more than 10 years ahead of the worst case scenario, possibly. So if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will.